For years, you were told that if you could still walk, you were winning against age, that each step was proof your body was holding together. But what if, after 75, walking is no longer the shield you believe it to be? What if the quiet stiffness, the aching knees, the uncertain balance are not signs of decline, but signals that your body has outgrown a one-dimensional solution? This is not about fear or failure. It is about listening more closely to a body that has carried you faithfully for decades and is now asking for a smarter kind of movement, one that protects your joints, restores trust, and respects the biology of aging rather than fighting it. Walking is a beautifully human rhythm, almost instinctive, and for decades it serves the body well, because the body itself is adaptable, resilient, and forgiving. In earlier years, joints are thickly cushioned with cartilage, muscles respond quickly to signals from the nervous system, and connective tissues stretch and recoil with little complaint. Walking then is not just movement, it is training by default. Each step subtly challenges balance, strength, coordination, and endurance all at once. But after the age of 75, the same movement begins to interact with a very different internal environment. Cartilage no longer replenishes at the same rate. Synovial fluid becomes less abundant and less responsive to repetitive motion, and the small stabilizing muscles around the joints lose their automatic engagement. Walking remains familiar, comforting, and emotionally reassuring. Yet, biologically, it becomes narrower in what it provides. The joint is not a passive hinge, but a living surface that depends on variation to stay healthy. Cartilage receives its nourishment not from direct blood flow, but from compression and release, a gentle pumping action that occurs when joints move through different angles and loads. Walking, especially at a steady pace on flat ground, compresses the same regions of cartilage in the same way thousands of times. Earlier in life, this repetition is balanced by spontaneous movements throughout the day. But later in life, daily movement often shrinks rather than expands. As a result, walking may maintain habit without maintaining adaptability. The joint is moving, but it is not being reminded of its full capacity, and tissues that are not asked to participate slowly withdraw from the conversation. Muscles are meant to shield joints from excessive force, acting like intelligent shock absorbers that adjust tension instantly. After 75, muscle fibers reduce in size and number, particularly the fast-reacting fibers responsible for stability and quick correction. Walking uses primarily slow, endurance-based muscle fibers, and does so in a straight line. The deeper stabilizers of the hips, knees, and ankles are rarely called upon, not because they are unnecessary, but because walking does not ask enough of them. When these muscles remain under challenge, joints begin to experience forces they were never meant to bear alone. Discomfort arises not from damage, but from redistribution of responsibility, where joints are doing work once shared by muscle. There's also the matter of range. Healthy joints thrive on gentle exploration of movement, small rotations, side-to-side shifts, and controlled changes in direction. Walking is almost entirely forward-facing. The hips extend and flex, the knees bend and straighten, the ankles roll through a familiar arc. What is missing are the subtle rotations that maintain joint surfaces, the lateral motions that preserve balance, and the slow resistance that strengthens connective tissue. Over time, the absence of these movements leads to stiffness, not because the joint is aging too fast, but because it is being underducated. Joints, like minds, become rigid when they stop encountering variety. The nervous system plays a quieter but equally important role. Movement is information, and the brain relies on diverse signals from muscles and joints to map the body accurately. When movement becomes repetitive, the sensory input narrows. The brain responds by becoming cautious, increasing protective tension around joints. This heightened guarding can feel like stiffness or pain, even in the absence of structural harm. Walking, while soothing, does little to recalibrate this sensory map. It tells the brain that the body can move forward safely, but says little about turning, stabilizing, or bearing load. The nervous system, left uncertain, errs on the side of protection. Balance is another silent casualty. Walking on predictable surfaces rarely challenges equilibrium in meaningful ways. Yet balance is not just about avoiding falls. It is a continuous dialogue between joints, muscles, and the inner ear. After 75, balance training becomes joint training because every small correction strengthens stabilizing muscles and lubricates joint surfaces. Without this stimulus, joints may feel unreliable, not because they are broken, but because they have not been reminded how to cooperate with the rest of the body. Walking alone does not rehearse these micro adjustments, and joints gradually lose confidence along with capacity. None of this diminishes the value of walking as a practice. It continues to nourish the heart, support digestion, regulate blood sugar, and calm the mind. But when walking stands alone as the primary form of movement, it becomes incomplete care for joints that are navigating the complexities of advanced age. The body after 75 is not asking for intensity or exhaustion. It is asking for precision, for movements that gently wake sleeping muscles, stimulate joint surfaces evenly, and reassure the nervous system to controlled challenge. Walking maintains continuity, but joints now require intention. There is a quiet dignity in recognizing that movement must evolve. Just as wisdom deepens with age, so must the way the body is cared for. Walking remains a chapter, but not the entire story. The joints, having carried a lifetime of effort, now ask for movements that respect their changing biology. Movements that speak in varied tones rather than a single repeated phrase. Movements that restore dialogue between muscle, cartilage, and nerve. When this understanding takes root, walking is no longer expected to do everything, and joints are finally given what they need to remain resilient, responsive, and at ease. The human body is remarkably economical, always seeking the most efficient way to move through the world. For much of life, this efficiency works in our favor, allowing muscles to coordinate effortlessly and joints to glide with minimal strain. Yet after the age of 75, efficiency can quietly turn into limitation. Muscle mass declines not only in size but in responsiveness, and the muscles that once reacted instinctively to protect joints begin to hesitate. Walking continues to use the large surface-level muscles that move us forward, but it neglects the deeper stabilizers whose primary role is not motion, but protection. When these muscles are no longer clearly engaged, joints are left to manage forces they were never designed to carry alone. Muscle and joint health are inseparable, but they age at different speeds. Muscle tissue tends to weaken faster than bone and cartilage, creating a subtle imbalance that is rarely felt immediately. In earlier years, strong muscles absorb shock, guide alignment, and fine-tune movement without conscious effort. After 75, this automatic support fades and joints begin to feel exposed. Walking maintains circulation and basic mobility, yet it rarely challenges muscles to contract against resistance or to stabilize the body in vulnerable positions. Without those challenges, muscles grow quieter and joints grow louder in their complaints. The stabilizing muscles around the hips and knees are particularly important because they govern alignment. Each step we take places a complex load through the joint surfaces, and muscles act as conductors, ensuring that this load is distributed evenly. When stabilizers weaken, even slightly, the load shifts. Cartilage experiences pressure in unfamiliar areas, ligaments stretch in ways they are not accustomed to, and joints respond with discomfort or stiffness. This is often interpreted as inevitable wear, but in reality, it is a signal of miscommunication between muscle and joint. Walking alone does little to restore this dialogue because it rarely asks muscles to correct alignment under slow, controlled stress. There is also the question of muscle speed. Protected muscles must respond quickly to subtle changes in terrain, posture, or balance. After 75, fast-reacting muscle fibers diminish, and walking at a steady pace does not stimulate their return. Without targeted activation, the body relies increasingly on passive structures such as ligaments and joint capsules for stability. These structures are not designed for dynamic protection, and over time they become strained. Pain then emerges not because joints are degenerating rapidly, but because the system designed to protect them has become undertrained. Muscle strength is often imagined as something dramatic, associated with lifting heavy objects or intense effort. In the aging body, strength takes on a different meaning. It becomes the ability to engage gently but deliberately, to hold positions, to control movement slowly, and to release tension smoothly. Walking does not cultivate this kind of strength. It is continuous and rhythmic, but it rarely pauses, rarely resists, rarely asks muscles to stabilize rather than propel. As a result, muscles become good at endurance, but poor at protection, and joints pay the price. The nervous system adapts to this shift in subtle ways. When muscles do not provide clear, confident signals of support, the brain increases its reliance on joint sensation. This heightened awareness can feel like pain even in structurally healthy joints. The brain is not malfunctioning, it is compensating for missing information. Walking, familiar and predictable, reassures the mind, but does not supply the varied feedback needed to restore muscular confidence. Without that feedback, the nervous system remains cautious and joints remain under stress. There is also an emotional dimension to this process. Many older adults take pride in their ability to walk daily, seeing it as evidence of independence and resilience. When joint discomfort arises despite this effort, it can feel confusing or discouraging. The assumption is often that more walking is the solution, when in fact the body is asking for something different. It is asking for movements that reawaken muscles whose job is not to move forward, but to hold, to steady, and to protect. These muscles respond best to intentional engagement, not to repetition. Restoring muscular support around joints does not require force or intensity. It requires awareness. Slow movements performed with attention retrain muscles to fire in the correct sequence. Gentle resistance reminds muscle fibers that they are still needed. Balance-based exercises reintroduce uncertainty in a safe way, prompting muscles to react and joints to trust again. When these elements are introduced, joints often feel relief, not because they are being spared, but because they are finally being supported. The failure of walking after 75 is not a failure of the practice itself, but of expectation. Walking was never meant to carry the full responsibility of joint health in an aging body. Muscles must be invited back into their protective role, and that invitation must be clear, deliberate, and respectful of changing physiology. When muscles once again take responsibility for stability, joints are freed from bearing excessive load, and discomfort begins to soften. The body does not need to be pushed harder. It needs to be listened to more carefully, allowing strength to return not as force, but as quiet, intelligent support. The body does not operate as a collection of independent parts, but as an ongoing conversation where bone, muscle, cartilage, and connective tissue continuously exchange information. When this dialogue is rich and varied, movement feels fluid and trustworthy. After the age of 75, the conversation often becomes quieter, not because the parts have failed, but because the signals they receive have grown repetitive. Walking speaks clearly to endurance and circulation, yet it says little to tissues that depend on gentle resistance, multidirectional load, and deliberate engagement to remain healthy. Over time, silence in these systems leads not to sudden breakdown, but to gradual withdrawal. Bone responds to stress, much like muscle does, adapting to the forces placed upon it. This adaptation is highly specific. Bones strengthen where load is applied and weaken where it is absent. Walking places a consistent, predictable load through the lower body, which is enough to maintain basic bone density, but insufficient to stimulate meaningful adaptation in areas that govern balance and joint stability. After 75, when bone loss accelerates, this specificity matters deeply. Without varied loading, bones do not receive the signal to remain robust in all the directions life demands, leaving joints supported unevenly and increasing vulnerability. Connective tissue, including ligaments and tendons, thrives on controlled tension. These tissues are not meant to be passive ropes, but dynamic structures that store and release energy. Walking stretches and shortens them in a limited pattern, rarely challenging their full capacity. Over time, connective tissue becomes less elastic, not simply due to age, but due to underuse in varied contexts. Stiffness emerges, often interpreted as inevitable, yet it is frequently the result of tissues that have not been asked to remember their adaptability. When connective tissue loses elasticity, joints experience restricted motion and increased strain. Muscle plays a bridging role in this conversation, translating intention into action and protecting joints by absorbing force. After 75, muscles require clearer instruction. They no longer respond automatically to low-level demands. Walking provides repetition, but not enough contrast. Muscles need moments of tension followed by release, slow controlled movements that teach coordination, and gentle resistance that reawakens dormant fibers. Without these cues, muscles disengage and the burden shifts to joints and connective tissue, which are less equipped to handle dynamic stress alone. Joint surfaces themselves depend on movement for nourishment. Cartilage, lacking direct blood supply, relies on compression and decompression to circulate nutrients. However, this process works best when movement varies in direction and load. Walking compresses the same areas repeatedly, which can leave other regions undernourished. Over time, cartilage health becomes uneven, and joints feel less resilient. This is not because walking is harmful, but because it is incomplete. Joints are designed for complexity, and when complexity is removed, their ability to adapt diminishes. The nervous system acts as the conductor of this conversation, integrating signals from bones, muscles, and joints to create a sense of safety and movement. When signals are limited, the nervous system becomes conservative. It tightens muscles, restricts range, and amplifies sensation as a protective strategy. Pain often arises here, not as evidence of damage, but as a request for clearer information. Walking, predictable and familiar, does little to update the nervous system's map of the body. Without new data, the system remains cautious, and joints feel guarded rather than free. Variety in movement restores dialogue. Gentle resistance reminds bones and muscles of their strength. Slow rotations and side-to-side shifts lubricate joint surfaces and stretch connective tissue in meaningful ways. Balance challenges reintroduce micro-adjustments that refine coordination. These movements do not need to be intense, they need to be intentional. When tissues receive diverse signals, they respond with renewed cooperation. The conversation grows richer and joints feel supported rather than burdened. There is a tendency to equate safety with simplicity, especially in advanced age. Repeating the same walk each day feels safe because it is familiar. Yet biological safety often lies in preparedness rather than predictability. Life rarely moves in straight lines. It requires turning, reaching, stabilizing, and recovering from imbalance. When the body is not trained for these realities, joints experience stress not because they are fragile, but because they are unprepared. Walking alone does not rehearse the full vocabulary of movement that daily life demands. Understanding the body as an integrated system shifts the approach to joint care. It moves the focus away from preserving parts and toward nurturing relationships between tissues. After 75, these relationships need attention. The goal is not to replace walking, but to complement it with movements that speak to bones, muscles, connective tissue, and nerves in equal measure. When this balance is restored, joints often regain a sense of ease, not because age has been reversed, but because the conversation within the body has been allowed to continue. Adaptive, responsive, and alive pain in the later decades of life is often treated as a simple indicator of damage, a signal that something has worn out beyond repair. Yet pain is not a measurement of destruction. It is a language spoken by the nervous system, shaped by context, memory, and expectation. After the age of 75, this language becomes more protective, not because the body is weaker than it was, but because it has learned caution through years of accumulated experience. When movement becomes limited and repetitive, the nervous system responds by tightening its grip, amplifying sensation in an effort to prevent perceived threat. Walking, though soothing, does little to clarify this message, leaving pain to persist even when structural harm is minimal. The brain's primary responsibility is not movement, but survival. It constantly evaluates information from joints, muscles, and connective tissue to decide how much freedom to allow. When the quality of this information declines, the brain errs on the side of restriction. After 75, sensory input often narrows because daily movement becomes more predictable. The brain receives fewer signals that demonstrate strength, stability, and adaptability. In response, it increases protective output, which may feel like stiffness, soreness, or sharp discomfort. This response is not malfunction. It is a logical reaction to uncertainty. Walking provides reassurance of continuity. It tells the brain that forward motion is safe and familiar. However, it does not provide the varied sensory experiences needed to update the brain's assessment of joint capacity. Turning, balancing, resisting, and controlling movement slowly, are the experiences that teach the nervous system that joints remain capable. Without them, the brain assumes fragility, even when tissues are structurally sound. Pain, in this context, is not a warning of imminent injury, but a request for clearer, more diverse information. Fear subtly influences this process. After a certain age, many individuals begin to associate discomfort with decline, interpreting any pain as evidence that movement should be reduced. This well-intentioned caution further limits sensory input, reinforcing the brain's protective stance. Muscles tighten, joints stiffen, and the cycle continues. Walking, performed carefully and predictably, may feel safe, but it does not challenge this pattern. It maintains the status quo rather than reshaping the nervous system's expectations. The nervous system learns through contrast. It needs to experience effort followed by ease, tension followed by release, challenge followed by success. Gentle strength work, balance exercises, and slow controlled movements create these contrasts in a safe way. They show the brain that joints can tolerate load, that muscles can stabilize, and that balance can be recovered. When these experiences are repeated, the brain gradually lowers its protective output. Pain softens not because joints have been avoided, but because the nervous system has regained confidence in the body's abilities. This reframing of pain is particularly important after 75, when structural changes are inevitable but not always problematic. Imaging studies often reveal arthritis, cartilage thinning, or disc degeneration, yet these findings do not reliably predict pain. Many people with significant structural changes experience little discomfort, while others with minor changes feel considerable pain. The difference often lies in how the nervous system interprets sensory input. Walking alone does little to influence this interpretation because it does not enrich the sensory environment. It keeps the nervous system in a narrow informational loop. Movement that engages awareness plays a powerful role here. Slow, intentional exercises encourage attention to sensation without fear. They teach the brain that sensation does not automatically equal danger. Over time, this awareness reduces the nervous system's tendency to overreact. Joints feel less guarded, muscles relax, and movement becomes smoother. Walking can then regain its role as a pleasurable activity rather than a test of endurance or tolerance. Compassion is essential in this process. Pain can be isolating, especially when it persists despite consistent effort. Many older adults feel frustration or self-blame, believing they have failed to maintain their bodies. Understanding pain as a protective signal rather than a verdict of decline restores agency. It opens the door to curiosity rather than fear. Instead of asking how much more walking is needed, the question becomes what kind of information the nervous system is missing. When movement is approached as communication, the goal shifts from avoidance to clarity. Each gentle challenge tells the brain that the body is still capable of adaptation. Each successful balance correction rewrites expectations. Each controlled movement under light resistance reassures the nervous system that joints are supported. Walking alone cannot deliver these messages, not because it is insufficient, but because it speaks in too narrow a dialect. As the nervous system becomes better informed, its protective responses gradually soften. Pain loses its urgency and becomes quieter, sometimes fading entirely, sometimes remaining as a manageable whisper rather than a commanding voice. The body does not need to be convinced that it is young again. It needs to be shown that it is still competent. Through varied, intentional movement, the nervous system relearns trust, and joints begin to feel less like fragile structures and more like living participants in a body that continues to adapt, learn, and move with dignity. There comes a moment later in life when effort alone no longer delivers the results it once did. After 75, many people discover that consistency is no longer the missing ingredient. They have been consistent for decades. What changes instead is the body's request. It no longer responds to quantity in the same way, and it no longer thrives on repetition without reflection. The tissues of the body have matured, adapted, and learned from a lifetime of movement, and now they ask for care that is guided not by habit, but by understanding. Longevity of movement becomes less about how much is done and more about how attentively it is done. The aging body values precision over intensity. Muscles no longer benefit from being pushed indiscriminately. and joints no longer tolerate being asked to perform without adequate preparation. After 75, small adjustments in posture, alignment, and tempo make a profound difference. A slow, controlled movement can stimulate muscle fibers more effectively than a long walk performed on autopilot. When movement is deliberate, the body receives clear signals about where strength is needed and how support should be distributed. This clarity reduces unnecessary strain and allows joints to move with less resistance. Awareness becomes a form of strength in itself. Paying attention to how the feet contact the ground, how the hips align over the knees, how the spine balances effort and ease transforms movement into a dialogue rather than a task. Walking, when performed mindlessly, can reinforce existing imbalances. When complemented by intentional movement, it becomes part of a broader strategy that respects the body's current needs. The goal is not to replace familiar habits, but to enrich them with depth and care. After 75, recovery matters as much as activity. Tissues repair more slowly, and the nervous system takes longer to integrate new information. Gentle movements that alternate engagement with rest allow the body to adapt without becoming overwhelmed. This rhythm of effort and recovery supports joint health more effectively than prolonged repetitive motion. When the body is given time to respond, it often rewards that patience with increased comfort and confidence. There is also a psychological shift that accompanies this stage of life. Many people carry an internal narrative that equates aging with inevitable decline. This belief subtly shapes how movement is approached, often leading to either overexertion in an attempt to resist aging or excessive caution in fear of injury. Both extremes place stress on joints. A more sustainable approach emerges when movement is framed as stewardship rather than resistance. The body is not something to battle or protect from use. It is something to collaborate with. Intentional movement fosters this collaboration. Simple strength exercises performed with attention reestablish trust between muscle and joint. Balance work, even in modest amounts, restores a sense of control and stability. Gentle range of motion movements remind joints of their capacity without forcing them beyond comfort. These practices do not demand athleticism, they require presence. When presence is cultivated, the body often responds with unexpected resilience. Walking retains its value within this framework, but it is no longer burdened with unrealistic expectations. It becomes one voice among many, supporting cardiovascular health and mental well-being, while other forms of movement address stability, strength, and joint nourishment. This balanced approach reduces frustration because it aligns effort with outcome. Discomfort is no longer interpreted as failure, but as information guiding adjustment. There is a quiet dignity in adapting movement with age. It reflects wisdom rather than weakness. Choosing movements that serve the body's current biology honors the years of experience carried in every joint and muscle. After 75, the body is not fragile by default. It is specific. It thrives when given what it needs, not what it once needed. This distinction changes everything. When movement is guided by understanding, joints often feel lighter, not because they are spared from use, but because they are used intelligently. Muscles resume their protective role, the nervous system relaxes its vigilance, and movement regains a sense of ease. The body continues to age, but it does so with support rather than strain. In this way, longevity is not measured by distance walked or minutes logged, but by the quality of connection between intention and action, between awareness and motion, allowing the body to remain capable, responsive, and quietly